Donc, j'ouvre maintenant la séance du Comité des droits internationaux.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the 51st meeting of the subcommittee of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Affairs. But before beginning, I'd like to ask all members and all participants to take a look at the cards in the table to see what are the instructions to avoid audio feedback. We have these measures to protect the health and safety of all the participants, including the interpreters, which are well loved. Please use the earpiece. Its color is black. The old ones are gray. Only those. And make sure that you place it face down on the sticker on the table when you are not using it. And thank you very much for your cooperation. Much appreciated, particularly by the interpreters. Today's meeting will be in hybrid format in order to ensure the good operation of this. I have a few comments to make to the MPs. Before taking the mic, please make sure that you are identified, and if you're on Zoom, please use the icon raised hand. We will do our very, very best to maintain a coherent speakers list. You may speak in the language of your choice. You have English, French, or floor. If the interpretation services cease, please tell me right away. All questions and comments should be addressed through the chair. I hope Madam Chair is there. Thank you. Now, I would like to advise all the witnesses have been tested for the audio quality before the meeting. This afternoon, we'll be looking at human rights situation in Iran, in keeping with the amendment adopted on the 24th of March on foreign interventions. We are going to, this is a warning for target words, so we're going to be talking about some very difficult situations, and if you feel that you may need help or having trouble, please let us know. We're going to be quite flexible with the 5-minute limit on the introductory paragraphs, and that for the members' questions and answers. So thank you all. And I think we're ready to go. I'd like to welcome our witnesses. As individuals appearing today, we have Nazanin Afshinjam, Human Rights Advocate, video conference. Atena Daimi, Human Rights Advocate. Arash Sobani, musician and producer, by video conference. Hanye Ziai, excuse the pronunciation, political scientist and Iranologist. Raoul Dandreau, Chair, UQAM, and Ms. Boniadi, actress by Human Rights Advocate and actress, video conference. We'll begin shortly, and welcome one and all. I would invite Ms. Nazarin Afshinjam. You have the first word. Yes, thank you very much for this invitation.
Before this same committee 17 years ago, and tragically, the human rights atrocities in Iran remain the same, as do my recommendations. The war on women continues, where girls are beaten, dragged, screaming into police vans, and raped for not wearing a hijab. There's a surge in executions of peaceful protesters, and there's a crisis in Turkey where bona fide Iranian refugees, like Shilan Mirzai, are sent notices of deportation back to Iran despite lethal outcomes. Preparing for this talk, I came to the conclusion that I could not possibly scratch the surface in a 5-minute talk about the abuses of human rights by the Islamic Republic. Therefore, I would like to ask permission to table the 20-page synopsis of the 500-page recent UN's fact-finding mission report. It covers the time frame of September 2022 after the death of Mahsa Jina Amini at the hands of the regime's morality police, which sparked the Woman Life Freedom uprisings, killing more than 600 peaceful protesters. Excuse me, I can hear the simultaneous translation, Persian translation.
We suspend for a few seconds, please.
What should I do here?
So on
Back
the
to meeting for 2 seconds, please. Can we have unanimous consent to continue, or we have to stop because the bell is ringing?
Yeah, Chair, just to specify, let's vote from here, and let's just, if it's okay with everyone, I'd say let's just continue through the votes. Okay, great. Great.
Good. Yeah, we have for a few seconds until we solve this.
No problem.
Please. Yes, you may continue your speech, please.
Okay, all right. As I was saying, this fact-finding mission report. No, I still hear at full volume the Persian. saying, the UN's fact-finding mission report covers the time frame of September 2022 after the death of Mahsa Jina Amini at the hands of regime's morality police, which sparked the Woman Life Freedom uprisings, killing more than 600 peaceful protesters, 71 of those children, 20,000 imprisoned, the intentional blinding, targeted shooting, torture, rape, and death sentences of peaceful protesters on top of the existing systematic discrimination of women, persecution of ethnic, religious, and sexual minorities, among other abuses. I organized a delegation of experts and survivors of these abuses giving their testimony at the UN, and I would be happy to organize a similar panel for your subcommittee if interested. The most important part of the FFMI report was the conclusion that the abuses of human rights by the regime amounted to crimes against humanity. In other words, an international crime, grounds for the International Criminal Court, and grounds for UN member states with universal jurisdiction, like Canada, to try the perpetrators of these crimes in a tribunal. The report recommends this, to open structural investigations for these crimes against humanity. Journalist Negar Mojtahedi with Global News did an investigative piece revealing 700 such regime affiliates in Canada, 9 of which have been called to be deported. But instead of deportation, they could be on trial, setting the precedents for accountability like Hamid Nouri in Sweden. With each of these regime affiliates comes a trail of dirty laundered money and evidence of foreign interference, including threats to Iranian Canadians and political interference. My organization, Iranian Justice Collective, was here a couple weeks ago on the Hill, providing policy recommendations on foreign interference, the PS 752 file, upping the number of Iranian refugees, actions on listing the IRGC on the terrorist list, and expansion of sanctions we call Toomaj sanctions. I will table this as well if permitted and happy to elaborate. Shortly after the trip to Ottawa, my colleague received a call by a regime official in her family's home in Iran threatening how she would end up like the woman she was trying to defend if she continues with her activism. Let me pause and really stress that concentrating on Iranian human rights issues is not an altruistic pursuit. It is in the national self-interest of Canada and the Canadian public. The former Iranian Foreign Affairs Minister Zarif said in his book that there was no bigger pressure on the regime while he was in office than human rights pressure. That is why we hope you support our campaign to end gender apartheid in Iran and Afghanistan, as Canada did to end racial apartheid in South Africa. This regime has no legitimacy. 80% of the population want an end to the regime, and there was only an 8% voter turnout in recent parliamentary elections in the capital, Tehran. I say this as a proud Canadian born in Iran for the benefit of both people, for lasting change, not just for the benefit of stability in the Middle East by cutting off the main sponsor of terrorism for Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, not just to halt the export of military equipment from Iran to Russia against Ukraine, but for the safety of our Canadian public here on Canadian soil. We can't risk not having a strong Iran policy. We are not safe. A government's main objective is to ensure the security of its people. I recommend Canada join with G7 allies to host a conference or convene a task force to draft a strong Iran policy with human rights at its core, where there are real costs, economically or diplomatically, for non-compliance. For our safety and that of our children, we need a comprehensive strategic plan behind weakening the regime and empowering freedom-loving Iranians. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you for your nice speech. Okay, now I would like to invite Madame Athena Dayami, défenseur des droits de la personne. Vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes, Madame, s'il vous plaît.
You have the floor for 5 minutes.
We switch to... Okay, sorry, we have to switch. I would like to invite Madame Arash Sobhani, musician and producer of video conference, per video conference. Sorry. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Hi, I am Arash Sobhani. Thank you. Honorable members of Parliament, thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. The Iranian struggle stands apart from any other. Since its inception, the Islamic Republic has waged a relentless war, not against a political party, specific ideology, or rival, but against the way of life. If it is still culture to its essence, it's the very fabric of our day-to-day existence. The Islamic Republic seeks to dismantle and obliterate this way of life, resulting in nearly 8 million Iranians fleeing their homeland, millions losing their lives, thousands being imprisoned, and hundreds disappearing. This assault on our way of life begins by targeting the intellectuals, artists, and cultural figures, the very pillars of the society. The way of life under attack is a modern one, rooted in human rights, human dignity, and liberal democratic values. This modern way of life is the culmination of centuries of global struggle by individuals and people throughout history around the world. It has now manifested in Western countries, placing a profound responsibility on decision makers in the West. They must not only uphold human rights and liberal values within their own societies, but also safeguard the hard-won gains of countless individuals who endured torture, persecution, and imprisonment globally throughout history. Their sacrifices have granted us the freedom of expression we enjoy today in parts of the world. Therefore, I believe the responsibility of Western politicians extends beyond mere sympathy and condemnation. It necessitates taking meaningful actions, preserve freedom of speech and human rights globally. Now let's delve into some of the human rights violations specifically targeting intellectuals and artists in Iran. Cultural Revolution Purge. After the Islamic Republic's Cultural Revolution, there was an unprecedented purge of university professors and students. Around 20,000 teachers deemed too westernized were dismissed. Ironically, many of these operatives of this purge now work in Western universities as experts. Imprisonment of writers and intellectuals. In 2021, at least 277 writers and public intellectuals in Iran were unjustly imprisoned or detained. Many faced repeated detentions over multiple years, indicating continued repressions that they face. Chain murders. Between 1988 and 1998, over 80 writers, translators, poets, political activists, and ordinary citizens were killed in what became known as the chain murders. Detainment of filmmakers and musicians. Over 100 Iranian filmmakers and actors, 100 Iranian filmmakers and actors and musicians have been detained, banned from working, or face travel bans for supporting the 2022 protests. This has only happened in the last 2 years. 100 intellectuals and filmmakers and artists. Kiumatpur Ahmad and Dariush Merjui, two celebrated Iranian directors, were found dead under suspicious circumstances after becoming vocal critics of the regime. In individual cases, Toomaj Salehi, the famous Iranian rapper, has faced torture, including the injection of unknown substances and sleep deprivation, and is currently under a death sentence. Saman Yassin has endured torture, including mock executions. Wafadar and Daniel Mogaddam, two rappers, have been detained at an unknown location. Shervin Hajipur was arrested because of his artistic expressions. Artists like Rasulov and Panahi, famed Iranian filmmakers, face severe restrictions, preventing them from working and being productive. Rasulov recently had to flee Iran by foot, as he was banned from traveling as well as banned from work. The IRGC remains the main enforcer of these measures, creating various cultural organizations and dominating the entertainment and publishing sectors. Imposing sanctions on any cultural arms of the IRGC or any organizations remotely connected or funded by the IRGC can be considered as a step in defending the rights of the artists. In conclusion, it's imperative for the international community, including the Canadian Parliament, to take decisive stand against such violations and work to hold the Iranian regime accountable. Let's not just condemn these atrocities, but take concrete actions to support the rights and freedom of artists, intellectuals in Iran. Our collective commitment to human rights and freedom of expressions must transcend borders, serving as a beacon of hope for those who continue to resist oppression and strive for a more just and equitable society. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we suspend for voting, please.
من ابتدا تشکر میکنم. I would like okay.
Please, the floor is yours.
Bien. Bonjour.
No, I'm not.
Je me présente aujourd'hui devant vous pour témoigner de la situation alarmante.
Excuse me, it's
des
not
droits de
your.
la-
Excuse me, it is not your turn. Now we're asking for Miss
sorry.
Atina, then we go back to you. I'm sorry about
Sorry, sorry. I apologize. No, no.
Miss Atina, go ahead,
Sorry.
please. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
من آتنا دائمی هستم که از تو
نیم را زندانی سیاسی در ایران بودم. سپاه من را به دلیل فعالیت در حوزه حقوق بشر و به دلیل مخالفت با اعدام زندانی کرد. در طول حبس علاوه بر محرومیت از حقوق زندانیان از جمله درمان، بارها تنبیه و به زندانهای دیگر تبعید شدم.
I didn't have access to any medical services. I'm Atena Daimi. Between 2014 and 2022, I entered to 6 years of a hospital and political prisoner in Iran. My activities in human rights and opposition, I was sent to other prisons and my family was under trouble due to the situation. For 54 days I was hunger strike, and I realized later that I have discovered and developed MS. That in early May I traveled to Ottawa with flight number PS 752 Families Association to meet with members of parliament, including some of you, to advocate the specific action supporting Iranian human rights activity. Just 7 months after my release, Gina Amini was killed, and I became targeted for the Revolutionary Guard. For a number of months, I was almost 8 months with my sister and I ultimately embarked on a journey to Iraq and Kurdistan, to entering 10 hours talk. We had the opportunity to be accepted by Canada, and it is months that we are living in Newfoundland. The human rights situation in Iran is deeply troubling. Political and civil activities face lengthy imprisonment simply for expressing their opinion and beliefs. The injustice I experienced during my own imprisonment are still prevalent among political prisoners and their families. I joined other activists in petitioning the United Nations to acknowledge the gender in Iran and Afghanistan. The regime also discriminates against religion, ethnic, Baha'is, LGBTQ. In some, from 2000, it is more than 100 people have been committed to suicide. There is no free books or media. They created. There are so many children in the street working. There are billions of dollars that that the Revolutionary Guard will receive, and it is used mostly critical to Iranian economy, including the money will go to countries such as Canada. The people of Iran reject this dictatorship, but Islamic Republic advocating instead for the realization of women's right, the right of life and freedom. As I emphasized in renewed slogan, however, as I mentioned earlier, in 2022 alone, hundreds of protesters were killed, with report of this deliberate shooting, and following extensive investigation on by United Nations facility. The Revolutionary Guard, as you are aware, we lost the flight. The IRGC has caused so many people in Kurdistan. They killed 3 people, and by getting involved in the policies of Turkey and Kurdish, there is almost no way that you can have any justice system in Iran. They can cause more trouble for the many countries. If we don't do much in Canada regarding the flight PS 752 case, failure addresses in 2018, and recent reaffirmation by designing the Islamic Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. Additionally, I wish to highlight the trouble which exists. In Kurdish, there are many Iranians who left the country and have gone to Turkey or Iraq, hoping to find a way to live in a safe place. In Iran, unfortunately, there is a war with people every day. Instead of providing refugee to agents of the regime who view Canada as a sanctuary, I urge Canada. I am a victim of this judicial system of the Islamic Republic regime, having spent my formative years in its prison based on judiciary ruling. I urge you to include the Revolutionary Court judges and of Iran. As you have maybe heard about Toomaj Salehi, solely to be peacefully protesting against execution. Therefore, they have caused trouble for him. The people of Iran possess the courage to fight to their right. They do not expect foreign military intervention or interference in determining their fate. However, democratic nations like Canada can support Iran.
Il y a un politologue et iranologue, Cher Raoul Dandurand, Université de Québec, à Montréal. Welcome, vous avez le floor pour 5 minutes, madame, s'il vous plaît. Vous la
Monsieur
parole.
le Président, honorablement, c'est bon, je peux y aller.
Mr. Chair, may I proceed? Yes, please do. Please do. Can you hear me? Yes, we hear you very well. Thank you. Sorry, I was hearing a bit of an echo. Mr. Chairman, honorable members, I'm here today to represent my group. I'm a political expert, and we're living through a very difficult situation in Iran. Some of my colleagues, of course, are being detained by the Iranian government right now. Their situation threatens not only the parliament or government of Iran, and we have to make sure that we keep our defenses. I hope that I will touch on a number of subjects here. And I certainly hope that the repression of the state will stop. Freedom of expression is severely repressed. Citizens are allowed to have an opinion, but they can't express that opinion. One of these opinions in Iran, we have the freedom of expression, and we have the freedom to be quiet. The closure of newspapers, bookstores, and other forms of current. The publisher of the women's journalist has been closed and silenced. Censorship. The sound is very poor to the interpreter. And repression consists for ethnic minorities, religious groups, and the LGBTQ community. Ethnic, religion, and sexual minorities face systematic persecution and discrimination. In particular, religious institutions are particularly guarded and supervised as deemed a threat to the security of the nation. The death sentence is omnipresent. Iran is the second ranking person after China for the execution of so-called violent criminals. I have to intervene, Adam, because the sound is breaking up. We have some problems here with the sound coming through. Case. In 2019, he was condemned to 140 lashes and 25 years in prison. He was being accused of theft and as far as repression is concerned, it's not unique at all for any specific group. Many groups are involved. We have another individual, a rapper, who was condemned to the death penalty. And in September 2022 for crimes. Once again, we have to stop you because the interpretation is not working on this end here. Okay, I think maybe we might get some sound here. The movement was brutally put down, and then following the arrest of I have to stop you. I have to interrupt because unfortunately there's nothing but a garble here at this end. Mr. Chairman, I'm very concerned about the security of our interpreters, and I think that I don't think that with the connection that we have at this particular time is adequate. Lack of bandwidth, I believe. So perhaps if the interpreters are agreed to be taking a risk, but that's okay if they choose to. Because it's a very, very important issue that we're discussing here, and it's unfortunate that technology has failed us. Not the technicians, but the technology. And I know that perhaps you can hear you, but I would like to have everyone understand and follow this information that you're giving because it's very important. So, but we have to recognize the limits that are imposed on us externally. Because we'll get to questions and answers, and it's going to be very difficult to ask appropriate questions if we haven't heard your presentation properly. Well, I mean, it has been very unclear and hard to hear initially.
Perhaps we could ask her to send a written submission of her, no? Okay.
OK, continuez, madame.
Non, mais...
Well, no, because when we get the questions and answers, all the questions are based on, most of the questions we prepared are for the professor here. Now, okay, I'm going to ask her to continue for a while, and we'll see how it goes. Well, that's not what I'm saying. I would like to continue insofar as she can be interpreted, because otherwise it's pointless. So let's try to see what we can do. All right, we'll ask the professor to continue now, and we'll see how it goes. Okay. My notes were sent. If ever I have to stop or you can't understand me, you at least have the document in hand. As I was saying, as to women's liberty, freedom for women, obviously we were submitted to a series of arrests and with the technology that the state has, the surveillance cameras, for example, facial recognition technology, and the photographing of the license plates of cars, and to check if women are wearing a veil or not. Multiform repression, physical repression, but psychological is very frequent too. Protests are dispersed with great violence, and again, using technology, electronic or electrified batons, and not only political demonstrations, but there's often attacks on schoolgirls. This violence is both physical and psychological. 300 attacks have been reported, with over 5,000 young women, over 5 provinces in Iran, and they're put in a state of panic. The parents are completely shocked. and there's been a wave of hospitalization. I'll try not to extend myself too much because I'd like to get to the questions and answers, but the regime, Iranians are suppressed, oppressed by this. And this terrorism internally is a form of control. It's institutionalized in the RCGC. And we see the courage of these women, these civilians, artists, citizens, ordinary citizens, to protest. They still continue to protest. Bertolt Brecht said, those who fight may fall, but those who don't fight are already fallen. And I thank you very much for your attention. And once again, I really apologize for these technological problems here, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to Namazin Bodiadi, advocate and actress.
Please go.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your attention to the deplorable human rights situation in my homeland, Iran. In the last 2 years, Iran faced an unprecedented political upheaval, quelled only after hundreds of protesters were killed, tens of thousands arrested, and at least 8 executed. These woman life freedom protests were yet another reminder that the Islamic Republic is incapable of reform. Instead, it stays in power using a 3-pronged survival strategy: repress, deflect, and divide. Repression is at the core of this strategy. The catalogue of abuses by the regime in Iran and around the world is well documented. The Islamic Republic holds the appalling record of having the highest per capita execution rate in the world and ranks 177 of 180 countries on the World Press Freedom Index. As we've already heard, domestic repression includes censorship, blinding, rape, torture, and arbitrary detention. Ethnic, religious, and sexual minorities face systemic persecution and discrimination. And it's a gender apartheid state that is waging a war on women and girls. Despite the country's economic desperation, its parliament has allocated $2.9 billion to a government institution responsible for intensified hijab enforcements. As we've already heard from Mr. Sobhani, my fellow artists are also heavily targeted, including dissident rap artist Toomaj Salehi, who faces execution. After recently fleeing the country under treacherous conditions to avoid imprisonment, as Ms. Dayami also testified having to do, renowned filmmaker Mohammad Rasulov issued a defiant message to the regime. If geographic Iran suffers under the boots of your tyranny, cultural Iran is alive in the collective mind of millions of Iranians who are forced to leave Iran because of your oppression and barbarity. That barbarity sadly extends beyond Iran's borders. Human rights abuses are among the regime's primary exports, including assassination plots, abductions, and hostage-taking of dual and foreign nationals. It arms and finances violent militias throughout the Middle East, has enabled Russia's war against Ukraine, and abets the world's most disreputable regimes from Damascus to Caracas. To avoid accountability for its abuses, the regime has mastered the practice of deflection. Canadians are painfully aware of the Islamic Republic's attempts to smother the truth and evade accountability following the IRGC's downing of flight PS752, which killed 176 people. Despite official denials and stonewalling, the UN fact-finding mission on Iran concluded that the Islamic Republic was responsible for the death of Gina Mahsa Amini in September 2022 and for crimes against humanity in the ensuing protests. One of those crimes was the murder of 16-year-old protester Nika Shakarami, who authorities claimed had killed herself. Leaked documents revealed she was sexually assaulted and killed by 3 men in the security forces. The regime attempts to neuter UN bodies and lobby democratic governments to advance its hateful ideology. Finally, the Islamic Republic consolidates power by fomenting divisions. To prevent any unified opposition, it relentlessly sows discord and promotes fear and mistrust among Iranian groups and dissidents worldwide. Their notorious cyber army smears the regime's opponents to ensure no group or individual becomes powerful enough to challenge the status quo. The Islamic Republic's strategic partnership with other anti-American dictatorships aims to divide Western alliances. It exploits political differences, anti-imperialist views, and historical grievances to weaken global unity, maintaining enough support or neutrality to prevent a coordinated response to its actions. They attempt to exploit your democratic processes, institutions, and media, covertly influencing your decisions, events, and elections to suit their malign agenda and whitewash their crimes. The antidote to repression, deflection, and division is resolve, accountability, and unity. So what can Canada do? I'd like to offer three brief prescriptions. Firstly, to echo my fellow witnesses, Canada should immediately implement the motion to brand the IRGC a terrorist organization and expel Islamic Republic agents. In fact, rather than simply deporting them, I echo Ms. Afshinjam, I encourage you to exercise universal jurisdiction to prosecute those who have perpetrated atrocity crimes. You can also open structural investigations into systemic human rights abuses by the regime, which don't require the physical presence of perpetrators. Secondly, you can support Iranian civil society by establishing a dedicated immigration stream to annually provide refuge to at least 200 Iranians fleeing the regime's persecution. People like Shilan Mirzai, who faces deportation from Turkey back to Iran. Finally, under Canada's feminist foreign policy, I urge you to support the inclusion of gender apartheid in the Crimes Against Humanity draft treaty to hold accountable perpetrators of severe systemic gender-based segregation and discrimination. We cannot change the character of the Islamic Republic, but we must resolve to counter it. While atrocities are often, autocracies are often united in their domestic and global objectives, democracies are often not, which is why I urge a unified international response to increase the political cost to the Islamic Republic of its oppression and aggression and tip the balance of power in favor of Iranian freedom seekers. In closing, I want to take a moment to address my fellow pro-democracy Iranians across the world. As long as this regime is united and we are divided, they will remain in power. But in the words of our beloved Toomaj, if you and I become us, we are limitless. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Boniandi. It's really profoundly touching testimony. Thank you. And now I thank all of you, and we move to question and answer. I invite Mr. Guinness to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. There are so many great witnesses, and I think I'll start with questions to Ms. Boniadi and ask other witnesses questions in other rounds or later in this one. First of all, thank you for emphasizing your support for listing the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Parliament has passed motions, one unanimously just a couple weeks ago, and then another one 6 years ago that passed with a majority as well. Unfortunately, they have not been implemented by the executive branch here, and we continue to reiterate calls for the IRGC to be listed as a terrorist organization. Could you share more with us about specifically why this step is important, what impact this would have in terms of human rights in Iran and accountability for perpetrators of abuses, and if there's any insights you can share from other countries that have taken action against the IRGC and the impact that those actions have had, we'd appreciate hearing it.
Thank you very much for the question. If you look at, for example, Europe, they're very, they're moving forward with support for designating the IRGC. I think where there is a thriving and vibrant Iranian diaspora in places like Canada, where there's a democracy, the will of the people should be reflected in your policies. And if you look at a Pew Research poll, for example, that was done in 2020, it showed that 3/4 or more of people in 14 advanced economies had a negative view on human rights in Iran. That was only exacerbated, I'm sure, by the women life freedom protests that resonated really with people across the world, especially in democracies. So you'll see in the European Union, for example, that the European Commission president and members of the European Parliament are really pushing for this. If you look at places like the US, where there's already a designation that exists, people are safer than places in, say, the United Kingdom or Europe, where transnational repression really exists. We have the example of, in London, for example, Iranian journalist Pouria Zeraati being stabbed outside his home, which is looking more and more like it was a contracted job by the Islamic Republic. If we want to keep people safe, we have to list the IRGC. The argument that dialogue, for example, is important is really something that we should move past from. 45 years of dialogue has not kept people safe, and people are still being targeted. So I encourage you to please list the IRGC and listen to your vibrant and flourishing diaspora. And I know that Canada has been a leader in many ways. You were the first to call the 1988 massacre of thousands of Iranian, what it was, a crime against humanity. And I think you should lead in this and not wait for others to do it first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to follow up as well, but just first of all to say, I think your point that drawing out information from the United States, highlighting how people are safer as a result of this terrorist listing, that it makes a concrete difference in terms of combating transnational repression and keeping members of the diaspora communities safe is very important testimony. It's, in a way, it's obvious, but it's very important that you've put that on the record. I want to probe the point you made about adding recognition of gender apartheid in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty. This is something that I'm very supportive of. We hosted an event this morning focusing on Afghanistan and gender apartheid there. So I know we're hearing these calls from the Iranian community as well as from activists seeing the situation in Afghanistan. If you could share a little bit about kind of the mechanics of that treaty process and what the Canadian government could do to help advance that recognition of gender apartheid.
I believe there's written testimony being submitted, or that has been submitted by the Strategic Litigation Project of the Atlantic Council, that I urge all members to take a look at, that details exactly how it's done. But I just want to reiterate, as Ms. Ashinjam also said, that when we define gender, when we add gender to the definition of apartheid, and it's not just race, we have the opportunity to then hold perpetrators to account. We can't do that right now. And countries like Iran and Afghanistan really do have, systemic, and this is not just discrimination against women, which exists in many places. This is severe systemic segregation and discrimination that we're talking about. And once we do that, once we have it in international law, we can then hold perpetrators to account. It's really as simple as that.
Thank you. Ms. Afshinjam, having mentioned the gender apartheid issue as well, could you add your thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. We now have 10 states supporting the consideration of gender apartheid in the draft Crimes Against Treaty, and we would love to see Canada do the same. So it's just Canada using the term.
Can you wrap it out, please? Can you wrap it out? The time is over, please.
Oh, excuse me?
Sorry, the time is out. I give you a few seconds to finish because time is out, please.
Okay. I was just saying we hope that Canada and parliamentarians start using the word gender apartheid so that it becomes recognized, and for this campaign to end gender apartheid. Canada was behind, with the leadership of Brian Mulroney at the time, convincing leaders like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher to get on board and champion the cause for ending racial apartheid in South Africa. So we are hoping Canada will also take the lead, because it really is about political will. If our parliamentarians want to see an end to gender apartheid in Iran, and if you collaborate with your European allies and Australian allies, we can make this happen. And it's not just a symbolic gesture.
Thank you.
I think.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Just one more question from each of us.
I'll be happy to speak to you more about it afterward.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Mr. Ali, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and allow me to start off by thanking all the witnesses for being with us today. You have certainly provided us with a lot of powerful testimonies. Let me start off by highlighting what Mr. Sobhani said, which is that Iran essentially stands apart from other countries. As you know, currently the latest Nobel laureate languishes in jail. We also know that the country's most preeminent lawyer, Ms. Nasrin Sotoudeh, is serving a sentence. The country's most popular musician, Toomaj Salehi, he has been sentenced to death. The same goes for the country's most prominent director. So I recognize full well how dire and how appalling the human rights situation in Iran is. Let me start off with Ms. Dayemi. We heard over the course of the past several days that the president of Iran has died, but we saw scenes not only from within Iran, but from the diaspora community throughout Europe and in North America that they were celebrating. How do you explain that, and why is it that the president of Iran was such a detested individual?
ممنونم از سوالتون. در رابطه با کشته شدن ابراهیم رئیسی
I would like to tell you in regard to what has happened recently, and the president of Iran was killed in that accident.
خب همونطور که میدونین ابراهیم رئیسی یکی از قضاتی هستش که در دهه 60 میلادی
he was one of the judges in the past which created so much trouble for Iranian by putting them to be basically
که دستور اعدام هزاران نفر از مخالفین جمهوری اسلامی رو صادر کرده بود.
people who were against the Islamic Republic, unfortunately they lost their life due to the decision which was made by a group. One of the members of that group was the previous president of Iran.
و در تمام این 45 سال نقش مستقیمی در تمام جنایت‌های جمهوری اسلامی داشته.
And in the past 45 years he had a he was a main character who was involved in damage to Iran and the trouble which has been created for different Iranians.
و به همین دلیل مردم ایران از کشته شدن او خوشحالن و این به این معنا هست که مردم انقدر خشمگین و انزجار دارن نسبت به حکومت جمهوری اسلامی و کسانی که در واقع همدست هستن برای ارتکاب این جنایت ها که خوشحالی کردن. و حالا یه مسئله دیگه هم
این مطلب it is interesting to know that many people celebrated this accident in Iran due to the damage which the society of Iran has been given by him and other fellows similar to him. Therefore, still in Iran, many people are happy because of that situation.
Thank you. And I think it's important to highlight that the latest polls from Iran suggest that 80% of Iranians would like to see nothing more than an end to this regime. So now if I could go to Mr. Sobhani. Mr. Sobhani, obviously Iranians are very much concerned about the death sentence for Mr. Toomaj Salehi. Would you mind explaining to us why Mr. Salehi, or Toomaj as he's referred to, is so popular within Iran?
Thank you, Mr. Asasi. Toomaj Salehi was one of the first Iranian artists who came out in support of the Iranian people when they took on the street. And his lyrics and his background as a metal shop worker, his upbringing, where he came from and everything made him very, very popular because he came from the segment of the society that he felt the pain and what was going on in Iran. He was not some celebrity who was pampered or promoted through Iranian media, the regime's media, or any of that. But he really was the voice of the people. And that's why people loved him so much. And that's why he was dangerous, because the Iranian regime has created this amazing system of creating parallel establishments to the artists, to the intellectuals, to whatever you want, even the opposition. They create something similar, and they have control over that. And that's how they managed the celebrities and the message that goes to the people. They couldn't do that with Toomaj. And with this new wave of uprisings, I think a lot of those celebrities who were before, they were, not so vocal about the atrocities of the regime, they also came out. We have so many football players in prison right now. Actually, I was going to say this. The IOC, the International Olympic Committee, has a refugee team that's going to the Olympics in Paris. 32 members. 14 of them are Iranians. So this shows how many Iranians had to flee in the last 2 years because of the pressure that they're facing. 14 Iranians in a refugee team that represents the whole world. This is very important. I would like to add one more thing. I know my time is limited, but I was just going through the public safety.
We're going to have to go to the next member, but we'll come back to this question. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your understanding. Maintenant, j'invite M. Brunet-Duceppe à prendre la parole.
Mr. Brunet-Duceppe, 5 minutes. Well, thank you. I have very, very little time, so I'll try to go quickly. Ms. Zahi, some have said that the death of the president was rather symbolic politically, but it will change absolutely nothing as to the Iranian policy. Do you concur with that particular point of view?
Suivre désormais suite en fait au décès du président.
Well, what will be the consequences? What is going to be important is to find out how the rest of that government will try to organize it following the next elections. We are going to have, obviously, a selected candidate to assume the interim position, probably a relative, and the candidates will be chosen by, these so-called elections, in quotes. Slates are presented, and that slate is a limited slate. It's not anybody that can run for election. So the population today, we find a discontent growing, and everyone is recognizing the anachronistic methods of this regime. President Raisi used this position as a trampoline or a stepping step to his original position. He was one of the potential candidates for the supreme leadership, of course. Everyone's trying to jostle for a place to become the replacement of the supreme authority. It's a power play going on. It's a struggle for power within the regime, and we have to follow this quite closely. The leadership class, so-called, in Iran has been divided, those who could lead. And Iranians don't know exactly what was the situation with this accident. 73 rescue squads were summoned, and we haven't had any photographic images except for a few images from Turkish sources. We know that the Iranian government may have managed something here. We know that they're particularly bad managers, and they are selling arms to Russia, and this sort of highlights the potential consequences that may happen. I have a question, a specific question. As a member of parliament, there are several groups that come and lobby, obviously, with various MPs who have various files. We meet a variety of people, and we note that the opponents of the regime are very fractioned. Some want to go back to the days of the Shah. Some are going for a more democratic present or future. It's not very easy, but it's divide and conquer among the opposition, I believe. We're talking about gender apartheid. It's not a very simple organization. There doesn't seem to be a unified opposition to the regime. Am I correct? And could you explain that? No, you're quite correct. There's a lot of division in the opposition. All sorts of groups, quite legitimately, given the number of the Iranians, the population, and the size of the diaspora. The Iranian diaspora, whether it's in North America or Europe, is growing every day. I think that it just demonstrates the illegitimacy of the regime. Everybody cites the same example. We all have witnessed the same situations. And we're trying to, of course, you have to understand there are differences of opinion even within the diaspora, diasporas rather. Insofar the diaspora is concerned, being divided, it's a very complex situation. The whole situation is complex. I can't, I'm sorry, I was, my time is expired, but through the clerk, I would like to send you some written questions, and I would very much appreciate if we could, for the committee, receive a written answer. I'll do that. Thank you. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Madam Professor.
I want to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of the witnesses for their really important advocacy and their courage to be here today, and for their important testimony. I'll start with Ms. Dayami. You've been a strong advocate for Iranian political prisoners and against the death penalty, and you've also been imprisoned for your advocacy and your work, and underwent severe medical neglect. And our party certainly opposes the death penalty, and we're grateful for your advocacy and that you've made it safely here to Canada. And I know you've also been an advocate for children's rights, and I want to ask you a bit more about that, especially since we don't often hear about the needs of children in Iran. And I met with the Frontline Defenders, the Irish NGO that helped assist you on your journey when I was in Dublin. And, they shared with me about, children, a 7-year-old, Helen Ahmadi, who was shot dead by the Iranian regime's repressive forces on her way home from school, and Kian Perfilik, a 9-year-old who was shot in the chest, and a 16-year-old, Serena Emalazadi, who was also beaten to death with a baton. Can you tell us more about this and what we as parliamentarians can be advocating for to defend children especially?
Okay. خیلی ممنونم از سوالتون.
Appreciate your question. Thank you.
در رابطه با اینکه چطور میشه به کسانی که در داخل ایران دارن مبارزه میکنن
Iranian in Iran in this situation.
من در متنی که خوندم توضیح داده بودم که در واقع چه چیزهایی لازم هست که برای حمایت از فعالین داخل انجام بشه، اما مهمترین کاری که میشه انجام داد من فکر میکنم که این هستش که در واقع همونطور که گفتم، یکی این که سپاه رو در لیست تروریستی قرار بدین، دو این که جمهوری اسلامی رو به دادگاه‌های بین‌المللی بکشونین. این افرادی مثل ابراهیم رئیسی که نقش مستقیم در جنایات جمهوری اسلامی دارن باید محاکمه بشن و تحت تعقیب قرار بگیرن.
As I mentioned at the beginning, and there are a few issues which we have to consider in order to help Iranian. One of them is the most important one is Revolutionary Guard, which is causing lots of problems in Iran. Therefore, we have to find a way so that they belong to where they should belong, which is terrorism. And the other one is people such as previous president of Iran, who was participating in many of these problems, economic reason and other reasons for the children who are in the streets in Iran right now.
جمهوری اسلامی باید در مجامع بین المللی پاسخگو باشه و کشورهای دموکراتیکی مثل
The
کانادا
Islamic
میتونن اونها رو
Republic is
پاسخگو
supposed
بکنن.
to be able to answer what they are doing in Iran to the international society. What is happening in Iran is not acceptable, and they have to try to answer to all of these questions.
جمهوری اسلامی افراد زیادی رو در داخل ایران کشته و الان در حال حاضر خانواده های اونها رو تحت فشار گذاشته، همونطور که اشاره کردید مثل خانواده کیان پیرفلک یا همین امروز به خانواده یکی از کسانی که اعدام کرده بود سال گذشته محمد مهدی کرمی حکم زندان داده. خب اینها همه داره توسط کسانی انجام میشه که مثل رئیسی در جایگاه قدرت هستن و مهمترین کاری که کشورهای دموکراتیک میتونن بکنن اینه که جمهوری اسلامی رو به دادگاه‌های بین‌المللی بکشونن و اونها رو محکوم بکنن.
But I would like to emphasize in few issues, as you know and you mentioned پیر فلک، اون فرزند بچه نوجوان و کرمی، اینها همه نمونه هایی هستند از ارقام بسیار بلندی که فقط ما چند تاشون رو عنوان میکنیم و افرادی که در این قدرت ها هستند.
You're speaking in Persian, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was talking in Persian. I have to go back to English. Yes. Children such as Pir Falak and Karami, there were others as well. I think when we don't have a democratic system, there are many people who are in power and they cause additional trouble. Thank you for reminding me.
Do I have more time, Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Ms. Atenia. And now I would like to invite Madame Vandenberg to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like 4 minutes. Oh gosh. Okay, so I will split my time with Ms. Demoff and try to keep it to 2 minutes. My question is actually for Ms. Boniadi, and I just wanted to follow up on something that you said about a war on women and girls in Iran. And we saw the entire world mobilize after Gina Mahsa Amini was murdered. And I think this testimony today is going very far in order to show that the world is still watching. But I'd like to go further on what you said, particularly the horrific case about a sexual assault by the security forces. And if you could comment perhaps on to what extent rape is being used as a weapon against women's advocates, against human rights defenders, but also against political prisoners, those who are in prison right now. If you could perhaps comment on that.
Thank you for this important question. Yes, and I steal the words from Amnesty International. The Islamic Republic is waging a war on women. They recently put out a report that documents that the security forces in the regime have used various mechanisms, oppressive, malign mechanisms to not only segregate but discriminate, but repress women and persecute women. That includes sexual violence, that includes beatings and floggings. It includes heavy surveillance to the degree that not only cameras, but people actually spying on women who enter businesses, for example, without a hijab, and then the business owner is shut down. That business is shut down if they allow the woman to come in without a hijab, and the woman herself can have her bank account frozen, her car confiscated, her cell phone taken away or frozen. So really it affects every aspect of a woman's life and of a girl's life. Girls have been gassed in school. The list goes on and on. They are using every oppressive, repressive tool they have to ensure they control women and their choice and the freedom for them to choose what to wear. And, you know, the compulsory hijab is just an outward symbol of women's oppression in Iran, which has really existed for 45 years. And yet women are still defiantly taking to the streets without the compulsory hijab. That says a lot about their courage.
Ms. Damaf, please, yes.
You mentioned a UN report that you wanted to send us a summary of. I believe it was UN. I would be happy to see that. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how efforts like that at the United Nations and other multilateral organizations help to raise awareness and accountability on Iran.
Thank you for your question. Well, definitely, this particular one is extremely important. There was a special session called for Iran after the whole world saw the atrocities taking place when Mahsa Jina Amini died, and they held this special session and called for a report. After a year, they came out with the first part of a report. Now they've extended the mission for a second year, so we'll have an even more comprehensive report by next year. And how it's significant is that the utmost highest human rights body on the planet, the UN Human Rights Council, has compiled this documentation into a 500-page report. And the most important part, as I had already said, is that they had concluded that these amount to crimes against humanity. What we recommended while we were at the United Nations was for the Human Rights Council to elevate and to refer this report to the Security Council, hoping that it will then be referred to the International Criminal Court. So in an element, we're hoping at some point for those responsible for crimes against humanity to be prosecuted in an international tribunal. But short of that, just the recognition that this is one of the worst human rights abusing regimes on the planet, and that there has to be a cost enacted for these human rights. Mr. Gord Johns had asked about children. Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Can you wrap it out, please? We are out of time.
When it comes to child executions, there's over 160 children on death row. And I think the way a country treats its most vulnerable is a testament to the entire. And just in that example alone, we need to enact a cost, and that means thinking twice about shaking the hand of these regime officials or giving your condolences for the...
Merci, Madame, merci. Thank you. Thank you.
Raisi.
Thank you. Thank you. Madame Hania, vous voulez dire quelque chose, mais s'il vous plaît, vite, parce qu'on n'a pas le temps, là.
Oui, j'aimerais juste ajouter un débat.
Well, I'd like to add to the debate, if I may. When they discuss issues about Iran, sometimes the selection of words is very, very important. Now, feminism, for example. We were talking about genocide. What is the basic definition of a genocide when we're talking about a target group? We have examples of testimony that's been reported. It's systematic. They've been targeting schoolgirls, young women. They attack students, university students, intellectuals, people in the arts and culture sections. Perhaps there might be a willingness by Canada to join other countries to use or not use certain expressions, but are part of the social reality. Thank you, Madame Heine. Thank you very much. Mr. Salban, please, quickly.
How putting IRGC on a terrorist list can help. I was going through the Public Safety Canada website, and there are lists of all these organizations that are listed as terrorists. If you go through that, most of them, not most of them, but a good portion of them, they get training and money from IRGC. So if you put those guys in the list, why not go after the main guys? Another thing.
Okay, thank you.
Gentleman mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. Mr. Guinness, you have the floor for 4 minutes, please.
Mr. Sobhani, the point you just made is so important. Canada already lists as terrorist organizations so many of the subsidiaries. Why haven't we listed the mothership as a terrorist organization? I think Ms. Boniadi's calls to action in her opening statement, the designation of the IRGC as a terrorist organization, the use of universal jurisdiction by Canada, and Canadian government support for gender apartheid designation are three very strong and important calls to action. I do want to reiterate my support for all three of those. I see a lot of heads nodding. I want to add as well that I have a bill before Parliament, C-350, which includes IRGC listing, but it would also allow victims of torture and extrajudicial killing to sue the Iranian regime in Canadian courts. I want to ask, and maybe this is a more difficult question, but I think it's important to get some feedback on. What we desire is to defend the human rights of the Iranian people and protect Canada from this regime, but also we want to see an end to this regime and the emergence of a free, democratic Iran that responds to the aspirations of everyone here. That would seem to require the presentation of a coherent political alternative to the current regime. We know there are many people talking about this, but there's also a lot of division between different kinds of proposals for that political alternative. I would welcome comments from anyone who wants to weigh in on this about the chances of presenting that kind of unified political alternative to the current regime and what role that would play in the freedom struggle. I see Ms. Boniadi and then Ms. Afshinjam, and I probably have about 2 minutes between the two of you.
I'll be succinct. You know, we have collectively, many of us here have been parts of an effort to unify the opposition. But let's remember, as I said in my remarks, that the Cyber Army, the Islamic Republic Cyber Army, and the Islamic Republic are invested in breaking us apart, which is why I talked about the importance of an cohesive international policy on Iran, and for the opposition, those who want democracy for Iran, to set aside any other differences and focus on a free Iran. I would encourage Canadian lawmakers to, when people come in to lobby you, when they talk to you about a free Iran, concentrate on how inclusive they are, because if they are only advocating for a specific ideology, for a specific outcome, then they are not representative of, Iran is not a monolith, as you know, and yes, the vast majority, I would say, want democracy, but that looks very different to different people. So I would encourage you, if you have a group lobbying you that is saying this, it's my way or the highway, and we're not going to include various other voices, to take that into account and to see other people and to include other voices. Voices must unite for democracy, period.
And 1 minute, Ms. Afshinjam.
I'd like to echo what Ms. Boniadi was talking about. Yes, it appears that we're quite divided, but I think parliamentarians often hear the loud voices of certain extremists. But I want you to be hopeful that there is the silent majority. There is the middle people that are united, that want freedom, democracy, human rights in Iran. Actually, all of us, extreme or not, we all want an end to the regime. And the only choice will be at the ballot box in a free and democratic Iran for the Iranian people to decide. But just so you're aware, I am facilitating a network of 90 Iranian diaspora groups. And we work very well together on campaigns and projects, and we're unified in our aim to see this democratic system. So if you need a unified voice, we can deliver them to you in Parliament.
Thank you. Monsieur Brunet-Dessep, 4 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very pleased to have heard the last two answers from Ms. Boniadi and Afshinjam. It answers a question I'd asked earlier, and it's exactly what we want to know. We want to help, but at least we don't want to hinder. So we're all defenders here of human rights. The worst we can do in such a situation was to encumber you or get in your way. So you're going to hear from me shortly, I guarantee it. Madam Professor, I'm sorry to call you that, but I have a hard time with the pronunciation of your name. But recently, we've seen in Cannes what has happened with Rasulov, who left, and he got his message across, but he had to leave the country. How does the lack of liberty and freedom impact artists, journalists, and others to create a change? Well, the impact is enormous. There are two schools of thought on that. We're in creative industries, and vis-a-vis censorship, that is very serious for us. We know what it's about, censorship. I mean, they want to silence us, particularly on the diffusion and distribution of our product. It would have long-term and short-term repercussions, particularly journalists who are at specific risk. When censorship becomes total and internalized by our citizens, that can do a lot of harm, because it puts the chains on independent thinking. And it's hard to know what to do, of course, to counter this attack. Iranians have shown very, very innovative and creative, using humor, using satire, to deflect a bit the effect that the regime is trying to do. But there's all sorts of reading between the lines. There's a lot of coding going on. And they have to deal with a number of constraints on a day-by-day basis, whether it's creativity or... Well, we sort of touched on the subject earlier, but someone like Toomaj and others that are outside the country, and they are a harassment to the regime, how does that manifest? Is there threats to their family or left behind? Is there a real danger for the security of anyone left in Iran? Yes, absolutely. We've seen a lot of intimidation, bullying by the Islamic Republic. They go after individuals, but if they can't get you, they'll get your social group or your family. They're called in, and they're given a blank page and a pen, and they have to provide a confession. So a lot of artists today, the first thing that we ask a caricaturist to do is to give names of other dissenters. Not only do they get the artist, his colleagues, his entourage, but they also go after the family. The families of many of these people in exile, Godshifte and many others, are under enormous pressure on a day-by-day basis. And this is how they operate. This is how the Republic operates. So you're almost obliged to give them information, no matter what. The pressure is very strong. So they get involved in people's private lives. It's a form of intimidation, of course, for these individuals. In their jobs, in their private lives, it reflects a social reality what they're trying to hide. Well, thank you. I want to thank you and all the witnesses. We didn't have half enough time what we would have liked to have, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Zaid just started touching on it, and Mr. Sobhani, you talked about how, we've seen so many Iranian culture leaders, artists, musicians, actors speak out about the human rights of Iranian people. And my colleague, NDP MP Bonita Zerillo, recently put out a statement in support of hip-hop artist Toomaj Salehi, and he's obviously been sentenced to death for his art. We know that musicians and artists are at high risk of being targeted by the Iranian regime. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about what this means to Iranians, both within Iran and in the diaspora, to see their aspirations for human, civil, and for political rights, and their hopes for freedom represented in music and art, and how we as Canadians and parliamentarians can better support their work.
Thank you for the important question. As I mentioned before, the Islamic Republic is systematically trying to get rid of the artists, the cultural influencers, and intellectuals. And what they're trying to do is basically eliminate a part of our memories of what Iran was, of our culture. They're trying to fabricate a history. They're trying to push the middle class out, what they have done. 8 million people had to leave. Those who are staying in Iran, if they want to have any artistic expressions, they're under tremendous amount of pressure. So there's nothing going to be documented in, let's say, 50, 60 years from what's going on right now in Iran, because no artist is allowed to record what's happening. What they're seeing, that is the work of the artist. The artist artist's job is to see what's going on with the society, record it, and kind of express what the society feels about the current situation. And that will be non-existent in 50 years because nobody is allowed to express themselves freely. So this is a huge thing. Iran is basically going through a transformation that's going to eliminate its middle class, and it's going to eliminate the artists and free-thinking intellectuals. I think one huge important thing that Canadians and the free world should do is support these voices in different levels as they can. The media should give them more coverage. The politicians should start talking about them more. You know, these keywords and the names. The Western artists, they have done it. I mean, Sting, Coldplay, Peter Gabriel, they all signed a statement about Toomaj Salehi. So I think I think the West has done this before for the Soviet bloc writers and intellectuals, and same as in South Africa. I think that there are examples, and I think that's what needs to be done.
Thank you. Ms. Afshan-Jam, you talked about gender apartheid. This is the first women-led counter-revolution in modern history, and the NDP has a study coming up at our sister committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee on Iran, and the importance of listing the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Beyond listing the IRGC, beyond sanctions, what do you recommend we as parliaments focus on to support civil and human rights of Iranians? And also, we don't have diplomatic ties right now with Iran, and we're part of a community of like-minded states who believe strongly in advocating for democracy, freedom, and human rights. What do you want us to focus our work on, and what isn't helpful, really, in your view?
Okay, first of all, I'm going to combine your Toomaj question with this one. Yeah. And there's a Toomaj Act that has been drafted in the United States, and our organization, Iranian Justice Collective, has created a Canadian version of this Toomaj Act, which is asking for an expansion of Canada's sanctions to include revolutionary courts, their prosecutors, judges, and staff. Some such figures are already included in Canada's sanctions, but we're asking to include a more comprehensive list of authorities and officials. So beyond also listing the IRGC on the terrorist list, we encourage the Magnitsky Act to be enacted, in that we deny regime officials from coming here. We have a better system to vet who comes and who goes out. And also, those that are threatened here on Canadian soil, we also ask for a mechanism. Where do Canadians go? Are they supposed to get in touch directly with a CSIS member? Is there a phone number? And also, one of our questions from the community is, there was a $76 million allocation by the government to support our cause, the Women Life Freedom cause, and yet we don't know where that's being allocated. Definitely, we could use that funding to support our civil rights activists and NGOs here in Canada to come up with a proper Iran policy to give you exactly what you're asking.
Thank you, Ms. Nazamin. And on behalf of all members of the committee, I would like to thank all the witnesses for their presence, for their nice testimony, for answering questions, clarifying a lot of things for this committee. It is highly appreciated and wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you. We very much appreciate it.